Hi everyone, and welcome to another Rubber Dance Design Team tutorial, and today I'm going to talk you through how I made a card with a little bit of a difference. When I started out along this frosty theme, which is our theme for this month for the Rubber Dance Design Team, I thought, oh, this is going to be a Christmas card, but the more I worked on it, the more I thought, actually, it's quite romantic and I might use it as a Valentine's card. So this is my Snowy Valentine, and you can see two little lovebirds sitting, admiring the view and snuggling up, and I hope that you're going to enjoy this tutorial. And I can't believe that I've already made my Valentine's card for this year. So I've used a little bit of a mixture from my rubber dance stamps this time. So the little birds are from Vintage Birds, and the first stamp that I use around the edge is from Pines for You, and the sentiment is from the brand new set Winter Wonderland, which was designed by the lovely Katie from our design team. So you start off with a piece of white card. I'm sorry about the fuzz, but it doesn't like white very much on its own. So it was 11.5 by 5 3/4 and scored at 5 3/4. Then I have two squares at 5 1/4 inches. These used to be, or they are, should I say, basil cardstock. It's from a 6 by 6 sheet, and I love that colour blue. I thought it would make a great frosty sky, and two pieces of black cardstock, which is just slightly bigger, at 5 3/8 inch square. And as usual, you'll find the measurements over on the Rubber Dance blog. This is a tutorial that's going to be featured over at the Rubber Dance blog, so I'll leave you the links at the end of this video. I've started out by picking out one of the small branches of, I'm not sure if it's a pine or a fir, or it might even be a yew. I think it's a fir, and I'm using a little batch of embossing powder that I mixed up for myself recently. So it's more than one colour in here, and it's got little flecks of gold and two shades of green and a little bit of a turquoise. So don't be afraid to mix your embossing powders if you want to. I'm using a Versamark ink pad. That's a sticky ink for those of you that are new to using embossing powders, and I'm using that as the glue to hold my embossing powder in place until I heat set it with my heat gun. Now the idea is to create a little bit of a frame on two corners of my sheet of coloured cardstock to make it look as if we're looking through some pine trees to the view beyond. So I'm not afraid if they're going to overlap a little bit, and I'm just sticking to this top right hand corner to start with. And I really probably should get myself a piece of scrap paper to catch all the bits, but I'm gonna I'm gonna just try and catch everything in this bowl. So when you're using embossing powder, always check before you start to heat set it that you haven't got any stray little pieces of embossing powder, and once you're happy, then you can go ahead and use your heat gun to heat set the powder. Now you will always need to make sure that you don't overheat the embossing powder. If you overheat it, it will go dull and flatten slightly, almost melt into the paper. So you want to, as soon as you see the embossing powder change and go shiny, that's the time to move your heat gun onto the next little piece of embossed stamping. And I'm going to repeat that in the bottom left hand corner, only I'm just going to make it a little bit heavier, make it come a little bit further into the card than I did on the top corner. So again, using my Versamark ink pad, just working out where to stamp. And then last but not least, just coming a little bit onto the front edge of the card. And again, adding the embossing powder. And it was at this point that I noticed I've just missed a little bit in the corner. Not to worry, I'll heat emboss what I've got so far, and then I'll just re-stamp that little bit in the corner with another little bit of the pine branch. So just tapping off the excess and then checking for any stray bits of embossing powder. If you can wipe it off with your finger, you can do that, but if it's really close to your stamped image, then you're probably best just getting a little fine paintbrush and removing the offending little piece of embossing powder, and then again heat setting with your heat gun. And then I'm just going to fill in that little hole with another little couple of sprigs of pine. And then I want to work my way all the way around the edge of the cardstock and make an embossed frame. Because this colour looks quite frosty, I think it'll look quite nice all the way around the cardstock and give it a nice edge. Now this is something that you might want to practice on a piece of spare card if you've never done it before, because it depends on the angle you hold your ink pad against your cardstock how thick your little embossed line will be. Now I'm holding mine quite flat, quite shallow against the cardstock because I want a slightly thicker line, particularly at the corners of the cardstock. You can see here that I've got a slightly thinner strip in the middle and then thicker on the edges. So it all depends how you angle your ink pad as to how much depth you'll get on the frame of your embossing powder. And it is quite easy to learn how to, perhaps if you want a really fine edge to whatever it is you're embossing, so for the finer edge you would have your embossing pad almost, not quite, but almost at 90 degrees to your cardstock. So just slightly past the 90 degrees and you will get a much finer edge. But again, I wasn't trying to get an even edge, I just wanted a random frosty frame around my panel. And as you know, I like to make a matching inner for my cards, and I'm just going to do a little line of fur across the bottom of what will house my greeting on the inside of my card. And again, I'm going around the edge and adding embossing powder to frame the panel that will be on the inside of the card. They're speeding things up so you don't have to watch me do the same sort of technique twice. So the next thing I want to do is draw a line for my little lovebirds to sit on, and I'm going to use a glue pen to do that. So this, instead of the embossing pad, it will hold, I'm going to use a black sparkle on this card, again going with that sort of frosty sparkly theme, and I'm just using my pen to draw a line across my card. I'm not sure if you can hear my dog in the background barking to come in, but I think I will have to stop videoing and go and let him in. Again, and on with the sparkle embossing powder. And it's a bit difficult to see, but I'm just heat setting that powder and I'm ready to put my little birds onto the wire. Now I'm not sure if you've seen me do this before, but this is a demonstration on how to use a stamp positioner. Now I made my own stamp positioner, but you can buy them, and I'm going to be using the little bird on the top of that little stack of birds. And what I've done is chop him off the whole stamp, and it means that I can use him on his own, but his little feet are still there, and I obviously don't want to get embossing powder on those. I haven't left myself much room to stick a little piece of post-it note over them. It's not really much for them to hold on to, so I'm just going to make sure that I don't get any ink. I've already prepped my stamp positioner, so I've got an acetate tag. But it could be an acetate square. It just happened that I had a tag on hand, which I wanted a piece of acetate that was a little bit thicker than normal. I placed my tag against my little L shape of Lego blocks, and then I stamped my bird on to my tag with some archival ink. Now I'm going to use that and position him where I want him. This could be the him bird, and then I'll do the her bird. So I'm sitting it on the wire, and then the theory is that when I put that little block back next to the tag, this time when I stamp my bird, positioning it again in that little L shape, he should sit on the little wire, and he does perfectly. So then I'm going to emboss him with the black sparkly embossing powder. Particularly important with black embossing powder to make sure you've got rid of all the waifs and strays. And I've just noticed I have got a little bit of foot dangling down below the wire. And then once he's heat set, just give it a second to cool before you place your little tag in position again. So I'm inking up my stamp. Always remember that embossing powder, when you initially heat it up, is still quite molten and quite hot. It doesn't take long to cool down, but if you put your fingers straight on it, you will feel the heat and you will smudge your image. So again, just masking his feet and pressing on that Versamark ink. So he's ready and inked up. So bringing back my little tag, my little reference tag, and this time I'm stamping my little she-bird. Making sure they're nice and snuggled up, and then holding the Lego positioner in place. And then nestling it into the block before pressing it down onto my paper. And there we have two little birds snuggling together on the wire. And this is where I started to think romantic thoughts, and that's how I turned this into a Snowy Valentine. If you make a mistake and you actually knock a bit of the embossing powder off the image, it's easy just to re-put the embossing powder over the image. And that's my two little birds all snuggled up. And the next thing that I need to do is create my snowy landscape. So sometimes when I'm designing a card, it didn't quite go to plan the first time round, and this was a case in point. I thought I was going to use some texture paste to make my snow, but you can see here it looks very, very white, and it looks a bit chunky compared to the stamping. So the next thing that I decided to do was try out some gelatos to see if they would work, but you can see that little white smudge is just too pale. And this is my picket fence distress paint, and again it's just a little bit transparent for what I want. It's too transparent, and the embossing paste was too thick, so I think I'm going to go with some acrylic paint. I did want to leave this in because I don't always get it right first time, and it's just a piece of paper at the end of the day. If you're not happy with your design, just have a little think about it, a little play on the piece that you're using. You know that it's not going to be the finished card, and I think I'm much happier with the texture of the paint, so I'm definitely going to go with the acrylic paint to form my little snowy hill. So I'm not trying to be too fussy with this. I just literally want a swish of white across my card. So I'm not sure yet whether to blend it out completely or just to have a little bit of a zigzag going across the card. And you'll see that I do a little bit of combination, and I blend out the edges of the snow, trying it first with my fingers, and then I think it would work better perhaps with a wet wipe. So smudging it out with the brush first. then I think I might have gone a little bit too far. So blotting it off and then tidying it up with my wet wipe. And at this point I think, nope, I've gone too much into a triangle. So this is the fun part of designing a card, just working at it until you're happy. And you'll know when that point is. Suddenly it just clicks and your eye is happy with what it sees. And I'm quite a believer in trusting that. If you see something and you just think it's something's not quite right, just to try it in a slightly different way. And before you know it, you'll have something that you're happy with. And I think I'm getting there. Blending out these edges. And then removing some of that smudge. And that's it, I'm happy with that. And then drying off the paint with my heat gun. And at this point I thought actually my pine branches would have a little bit of snow on as well. So I'm using a piece of dry foam and some of my white paint to stamp over the little fir branches that I stamped earlier. And I'm being really random. I'm not trying to get a pristine image. I'm just trying to work fairly quickly. Looks like my paint is running out. Now you can use paint on your stamps, but the word of warning is that you need to work quickly and you need to make sure you do not let your paint dry on your stamp. If you do, you're going to find it very, very difficult to get rid of, particularly on a detailed stamp like this, and you may well ruin your stamp. And so as soon as I've stamped this little piece, I'm going to quickly switch over to my little internal piece of card and repeating the snow on those branches. So just remembering which way I stamped them, and each time re-inking with that piece of dry foam. I should say painty foam now. And there, it just makes it look a little bit more frosty. And immediately I've finished, you could either just put it straight into some water until you're ready to clean it, or as I'm here, I'm just giving a really good rub with a wet wipe, and I think that's got most of it off. If you have any difficulty, just take it, run it under a tap and use a soft brush, and you'll soon remove all the pieces of paint. So this is going to sit on the black frame, and it's just a plain piece of black cardstock, and I've decided that I'd quite like that to sparkle as well. So I'm going to do the same technique as I showed you earlier. And then I suddenly thought, actually, do you know what? I'm going to add a little bit of that white paint. I interrupted myself, and whilst this little piece of foam has still got wet paint on it, I'm just touching the embossed frame and just putting a little bit of that white snow onto that as well. So moving back to my frame, and not much of the frame shows, so I know that I really don't have to have much of a border, and certainly don't need to be precise because most of it's going to be covered by the main image. But I am just going to work all the way around the cardstock, making it sparkly and matching my birds. So that's the first piece complete, and then I'm going to repeat the process for the second piece of cardstock, and that's the piece that's going to go on the inside. Two black sparkly frames complete, and I'm ready to attach the artwork and the inner into position. So as you know, I like to use glue to do this because I keep my cards for a while, and I don't want the tape to dry out and the pieces to come apart. I just need them to be a little bit more robust than perhaps they would if you're giving them to somebody for a birthday. If you're giving them to somebody that you know keeps them and likes to keep them as a keepsake because they know that you've spent a lot of time making your card for them, then I definitely would use glue rather than double-sided tape. So I know there's probably lots of scrapbookers out there that are thinking, yes, I know what you mean, that they've got some albums where photographs have come away from their pages because the ink or the glue has dried up. So I've attached the birds, and now I'm attaching the inside piece, and again I'm just making sure they join together and they stay nice and flat, and I'm just popping them underneath my craft mat while I get on with the next step. So starting to think about the final look of the card, and now I'm going to use ribbon, and I've got the perfect colour. It's something that I've coloured with one of my distress inks. So I'm thinking about tying a ribbon around the front panel. But first of all, I'm going to stamp the inside of the card, and again thinking about that Valentine's theme. I'm not going to use a traditional Valentine stamp. I can write that in my actual message when I write my card, will you be my Valentine? And but I'm going to use this stamp from the Winter Wonderland set, which says, "Baby, it's cold outside." Again, I'm going to emboss that with the black sparkle. Winter Wonderland set, there's a little set of lips all puckered up blowing a kiss, and I just thought, as I'm going romantic with this, I want a couple of little frosty kisses on the inside of my card. I'm just seeing whether or not the stamp works with white paint, and I'm happy that it does, and I'm going to add 3 little kisses next to my sentiment. And again, as soon as I finish stamping with the white paint, just working out where I want to put them, then I'm going to clean this stamp. And I'm going to try my brush skills and I'm going to try painting the inside of the word cold. And actually this paintbrush isn't very good because it's not got a very fine point on the end of it. I'd have been better off getting off my chair and going to find a slightly better brush than this one. Either that or I could have used a white pen, but because I've used paint on everything else, I'm going to persevere and paint inside the lines, hopefully to just pick out the word cold on this sentiment. That helps bring the design in with the white kisses. That's my inner finished, ready for me to write my words of lovey-doveyness to my husband, and I'm going to stick that on the inside of the card. Again, I'm going to pop that under my craft mat, make sure it all dries flat. And you need to make sure that you haven't got any glue on the edges at that point, otherwise your card will stick together. The sentiment on the front of the card, I actually did it without taping it, so I'm just going to give you a recap on what I did. I wanted to break up the sentiment on the outside of the card into 3 strips. Baby, it's cold outside. So I stamped each part of the sentiment by masking off the piece that, or the pieces that I didn't want in this case, and then inking it up and stamping it on my card. Now, depending on how clean you've got your stamp will determine whether or not you get any stray embossing powders, or if perhaps your stamp is still damp, you may well find you get some stray embossing powder. But the majority of the rest of the stamp should not stamp onto your cardstock, and it's quite easy to get rid of that little excess piece with a paintbrush. That's more to do with my stamp being a little bit damp. Now I did that for each line of the stamp, and then as an extra on this little word cold, whereas I coloured in the word with white paint on the inside of the card, this time I'm going to emboss the inside of the word using the green embossing powder that I used for the fur. So I'm just using the quickie glue pen, and again just tracing around the inside of all of the letters. And then heat setting. Now you can see the black lines disappeared a little bit, but I will put those back in with a black pen just to darken them slightly. Now the next thing that I wanted to do was cut out my little word strips. So I used my Tim Holtz ruler, lined it up with the top edge of the words to make sure everything was straight, and then trimmed it to size. Again, I repeated that process for each of the other two lines of the sentiment, and then I worked my way around, this time creating a really fine line, so I'm just touching that ink pad to the edge of the cardstock. Now when you're doing this, they are quite small, so be really careful of your fingers. Do not heat set to your fingers, and if you want to, you may well be wiser than me and or wiser than I, and use a set of tweezers to keep your fingers well out of the way of that heat gun. So I'm really just getting a very fine line around the edge of each of my word strips. So that's how I did it, but I have already done it once before, and I've got my 3 little word strips here, and you can see I just added a little kiss to that final line. I've also cut myself out some snowflakes, and these are a Marianne die. I'm not sure if I'm going to use all of them, but I cut all 3 that came in the set with the same white cardstock that I've used for the base of the card. I noticed that these dies don't actually have a little hole to poke out the pieces, which is a little bit awkward. So I'm just flicking out the pieces with my craft knife. Pokey tool might have been a little bit safer. I just managed to peel off a bit off the top of the card there. Don't worry, I haven't ruined the snowflake. And once you can get hold, you can quite easily remove it from the die. So again, I'm not quite sure where I'm going to put everything. First of all, I'm tying my bow. I'm going to tie at an angle to match the wire going across the card. So I'm just thinking about how much or how big a bow I need, and I'm going to place this snowflake on the top. I'm just using the 2 biggest snowflakes. So trimming my bow to size, and you'll see that I just pull it down a little bit to match my snowflake. And I'm happy with that, and just deciding whether to use a little black gem or a little sparkly heart, and I think as I'm going romantic, I'm going with the sparkly heart in the middle of the snowflake. So I've decided where my ribbon is going, and it's in place, so I can attach this to my card. I've got my hot glue gun on ready to attach my snowflakes and the little glittery heart. And whilst I'm waiting for that to heat up, I'm going to attach my sentiment over here on the left hand side of the card. And here's where I just decided to add the little edge back into the word cold. As well as adding a dot of glue on the bottom of each of my snowflakes, I'm also adding one behind the bow to make sure the weight of the snowflakes and the big dazzly heart does not pull that bow forward when it's on the card. So again, just trimming my bow so that it fits onto the card front and doesn't dangle on the table. So there you have it, one alternative Valentine's card. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and that perhaps you think about doing something a little bit alternative for your Valentine this year. So as usual, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, the like button, the share button. If you've enjoyed my tutorials, it's much appreciated. I'm working my way to 5,000 subscribers. Hopefully I'll hit that over this weekend. It really is a pleasure to know that you're enjoying these videos. Love your comments, always get back to you if I can, particularly if you've got a question. So don't forget to leave me a comment and I look forward to crafting with you again very soon. Thank you for watching. I can't actually link directly to Rubber Dance, so I always put a link to my blog where you can hop, skip and jump from there over to Rubber Dance. You can check out the stamps that I've used, or you can look at all the creativity that is shared with you, I think practically every day, over on Bibby's Rubber Dance blog, and there's lots and lots of inspiration for using Rubber Dance stamps over there. I also have a Rubber Dance playlist. This is another card using the gorgeous stamps that I get sent as being part of the design team, and I may also have used one or two Rubber Dance stamps on my art journal pages, and this page is no exception, so check out my art journal playlist. And then last but not least, why not pop over to my Etsy shop where you'll find workshops that you can buy to make larger projects like this one. This is my tag storage project full of yummy tags, and if you're a tag artist you might want to make one to store yours.